LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 21st edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 12 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be an informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. If you look down in the video description, you'll see the source of all my clips and also my clip list. These are the notes I take for myself to remind myself what I wanted to say about each of the clips or what's in each of the clips. My main topic is in the title, Border Crisis ? Because that is the question that everyone is posing on all of the big five corporate outlets, I think. Although I don't have immigration clips from all of the outlets, I'm also covering I have a couple clips at the end, one covering voting rights and filibuster reform with Senator Raphael Warnock, for the new senator from Georgia. And then I have one clip at the end, Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson admits on CBS News' Face the Nation that, no, not on CNN State of the Union, to Dana Bash, that he signed an abortion bill that is totally unconstitutional, but he's hoping to challenge Roe v. Wade. So those are a couple clips at the end, but the main topic is border crisis. I've actually wanted to talk about immigration for several weeks, and this was the week that it was the main story. Along a couple of the networks, as you'll see when I get to the news summaries, talked also about domestic violent extremists and right-wing violence as a topic this week. But it's a different kind of terrorism in my political comedy clip that I'm showing you, which technically isn't from the weekend. It's from March 9th. I almost used it last week. This is Senator Lindsey Graham talking about my main topic, immigration. And in this is in what passes for news opinion programming and Fox News primetime. I rarely take clips from the Hannity show, but this is Sean Hannity's show. Hannity talking way back on March 9th about the crisis at the border. And Lindsey Graham, of course, had to bring in terrorism, and he seemed to be, well, you watch the clip first, and I'll tell you the evolution of my thinking about what he was actually saying in the political comedy clip. Well, you'll see there's a rejoinder to the political comedy clip that's more comedic after I show you this 45 seconds from Hannity back on March 9th over here.
Let me tell you what's happened. Word is out that the Trump policies are being replaced by the Biden administration, that if you get 1 foot in America, you're never going to leave, and people are coming by the thousands. They'll be coming by the hundreds of thousands by the summer. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's going to be an economic crisis for our cities along the border. And eventually it's going to be a national security crisis because they're children today, but they could easily be terrorists tomorrow. This is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Al-Qaeda and ISIS would love nothing more than to hit us again on the 20th anniversary to show that they're still alive and well. And this border insecurity is a great way for terrorists to come into our country, just to blend in with this group.
Now, the first time I saw that clip, I think, was on an MSNBC show, kind of making fun of it. And it definitely sounds, especially, it was just like children today, terrorists tomorrow. Like he was saying that the terrorists were going to infiltrate children, like sleeper cell children, into the United States who are going to like grow up to be terrorists, which is like this really long-term terror. It seems kind of ridiculous. Having watched the clip several times, I think that a more charitable but still wrong interpretation is what he's saying is that the lack security created by the crisis at the border, where all these people are getting through, is going to be exploited by terrorists. But he does say blend in, and if you pay attention to the news summaries I'm going to show you later, you'll see that almost everyone is being expelled. The vast majority of the people being let in are unaccompanied minors. So they would have to be like terrorist children. And the few families and single adults who are being let in are heavily vetted. So Lindsey Graham's statement doesn't even make sense if you put it that way. But it made me think of a really old Doonesbury cartoon. I don't know if there are any Doonesbury fans out there, but a lot of I guess maybe that's why I like political comedy, or I have sort of an ear for political comedy, because I grew up reading Doonesbury. And when I was in high school, I spent a summer in Israel during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, and I read all the Doonesbury cartoons during that time. I was already a big Doonesbury fan, and there was a Doonesbury cartoon from August 1982 that I was reminded of, believe it or not, when I saw that Lindsey Graham clip, and I was so taken by the comparison that I decided to license it from the syndicate here so I could show it to you. It's Roland Henley is the journalist on the left there. He's like a junk journalist. I think he might be patterned on like Geraldo Rivera, and he's covering the invasion of Lebanon. And what is it now, Sergeant? We just got the final the count of the terrorist evacuees, sir. Does this include the terrorists wounded from the terrorist hospital? Yes, sir, along with the terrorist doctors and terrorist nurses. Wait a minute, what is all this terrorist business? Wasn't Begin once a terrorist too? That's Menachem Begin, of course. Mr. Begin was not a terrorist. He was a freedom fighter. Oh, how many terrorist relatives? 3,000 terrorist wives and 7,000 baby terrorists. And I don't know, I guess the Lindsey Graham comment made me think of the baby terrorists, and it did kind of remind me of the Israeli propaganda during the invasion of Lebanon, or what was it? Operation Shalom LeGalil, I think they called it, Peace to the Galilee. But I studied some stuff and learned a lot about that conflict back in the 80s, although I don't know so much about the more recent aspects of it. But that isn't the topic. The big topic is immigration, and I actually am going to pull an audible here and show a clip that is actually, if you're following along on my clip list, it's clip 10. I was going to show this later when Margaret Brennan brings up President Obama being the deporter-in-chief, and a lot of things Joe Biden is doing now in terms of immigration I don't think is very humane. And I remember a lot during the Trump administration, people would say, oh, and you even saw Trump say this during the debates, the kids in cages were started by Obama in the Obama-Biden administration, and saying to Democrats, where were you protesting immigration and ICE back when Obama was doing it? And so clip 10, this is me back in June 2014 during the Obama administration, talking about how ICE detainers were unconstitutional because they violate the Fourth Amendment, most likely. And this is about local law enforcement cooperation with federal ICE authorities. I don't want to go into all the weeds of it, but I wanted to show way back in June 2014, I was already, it's not really a partisan issue to let immigrants, people seeking asylum, it's not illegal to ask for asylum, even if you're a kid or a family or a single adult, and people shouldn't be left in Mexico. You'll hear about the Remain in Mexico policy when I get to the news summaries. But anyway, here is me back in June 2014 as part of a news conference representing my ACLU chapter, already back then complaining about Obama's immigration enforcement in this clip. Hi, I'm Alan Ash. I'm a member of the Sacramento County chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. We at the ACLU have been working for years to limit the use of ICE holds here in our local community. That's because holding people, prolonging their detention for deportation purposes hurts the safety of our community because it destroys the trust that local law enforcement needs to build with our local community. It also hurts our safety because it wastes resources that could be used for better law enforcement purposes, and it violates our core values of fairness and due process. That's why the ACLU worked to pass the Trust Act, which prohibits law enforcement from honoring these ICE holds in many circumstances. It's why the ACLU is working with our community partners to monitor implementation of the Trust Act here in Sacramento County, which went into effect at the beginning of the year, and then we were happy to hear that Sacramento adopted this policy of not honoring any ICE holds on May 15th. The ACLU of Northern California actually sent a letter to Sacramento County on May 2nd asking them to implement this policy and citing the case of Miranda Olivares versus Clackamas County, which clearly held that immigration detainers alone do not provide the probable cause to hold people in our jails under the Fourth Amendment. And that confirms what the ACLU has been saying for years, that law enforcement agencies that have policies that honor these ICE holds are maybe liable for damages. And that's why counties all around California and all around the country have been adopting policies that no longer honor these ICE holds, like the policy now here in Sacramento County. And the ACLU will continue working with our community partners to make sure that no individuals are held in violation of this policy here in Sacramento or in violation of their rights. And if anyone is held in violation of this policy, it's a sad demonstration of the way that the pieces of our broken immigration system have sharp edges that hurt real families here in our community.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you to the ACLU for your...
So, yeah, that was me, like I said, back in June 2014, already fighting for the rights of immigrants to humane treatment, to avoid local law enforcement cooperating with federal authorities. You know, I was talking there about the Trust Act, which was what some people call making California a sanctuary state. And people seem to think that means that ICE, the federal immigration authorities, can't come into California and detain anyone. No, that's not true. They can come in anywhere in California and do their jobs. The question is, should the local law enforcement, like the sheriff and the city police departments, should they cooperate with the federal immigration authorities? Because if they do, that means people who have, immigrant communities where they're like mixed families or people who have undocumented status, when those people are victims of crimes or witnesses to crimes, they won't talk to local police officers. And that makes everybody less safe. That's why it's really important to separate local law enforcement from federal immigration enforcement. And that's what I was talking about back in June of 2014, and something that we're actually still fighting for here in California and around the country. And it looks like Biden is going to have a more humane immigration policy, but it's certainly not perfect, and hopefully it will be better than the Obama deporter-in-chief policy that I was talking about before, that you'll see Margaret Brennan talk about in clip number 9. But let's get on to the news summaries, which I pretty much have in order from longest to shortest. And the longest one was actually ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they had Martha Raddatz riding along with the Customs and Border Patrol. And I've often talked about Martha Raddatz as, she's a good reporter, but she's very close to the military and law enforcement and apparently Customs and Border Patrol. So she gets this great access, but she also seems to kind of carry their message a little bit more than an unbiased reporter might. And actually I think all of the corporate news media kind of have a bias towards this is a crisis. That's the question that first Fox News and then pretty much all the reporters are trying to get Biden to admit it's a crisis at the border. But the real crisis isn't the people at the border. Isn't the border, it's the people. And the people are in crisis all the way back to Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. And anyway, I've been talking for a long time, so now I want to get to the ABC News Summary. I'm not going to show the whole thing, even though the whole thing is pretty important, because then when Martha Raddatz questions the Secretary of Homeland Security in charge of immigration enforcement, Alejandro Mayorkas, she questions him about what he just watched, That will be clip number 7. But I'm going to cut out the part where she gives free rein to a Republican governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey. That's the part I pretty much cut out of this news summary. But I'll talk about the 4 minutes and 45 seconds I didn't cut out after we watch together over here.
We join you this morning from El Paso, Texas, Mexico, just beyond that fence you see right behind me. So many on the other side desperate to cross the border, and so many here on U.S. soil calling for change, pressuring the Biden administration, loath to label this a crisis, even as the tide of migrants surges. The number of unaccompanied children and teenagers in Border Patrol custody reaching record numbers. Children forced to stay longer in overcrowded facilities, the media not allowed inside, the administration restricting access despite promising transparency, citing COVID and privacy concerns. The issue that at times plagued the previous administration now presenting a challenge to the Biden administration, one that shows no sign of abating anytime soon. We'll examine all the angles this morning. Moments ago, I spoke with Biden's Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. But first, despite the obstacles, we begin this morning with exclusive reporting along and above the border, speaking with stakeholders and those making the treacherous journey to the U.S. Flying low and fast over the dust of Arizona's desert, the view of the southern border is stark. Arizona's Department of Public Safety Rangers, who provide search and rescue, show us miles of wall and gaps where construction was halted after Joe Biden took office. One of President Biden's first executive actions was to dismantle the Trump administration's immigration policies, tough policies that critics considered shameful.
We made a policy decision that was the right, humane step to take.
And while the numbers usually increase after the winter, devastating hurricanes in Central America last year may have prompted more to attempt the trip, Customs and Border Protection show overall a nearly 30% increase last month from January, with 100,000 people attempting to cross the southwest border. Nearly 30,000 of them were unaccompanied minors. This group from Venezuela crossing the river near Del Rio, Texas. A small boy carried across on shoulders, his feet skimming the water. 50 miles away, a similar scene.
A group of 4 just crossed the river. Agents are here already, so they made it across. They're going to go to a processing center, and we'll see from there. This happens every day.
This significant surge coming after President Biden ended Donald Trump's so-called Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to wait there for their court proceedings. Since then, many of those tent cities along the Mexican border have emptied out as people start streaming in. We were there when a bus of 56 asylum seekers arrived at Casa Alitas, a Catholic charity shelter in Tucson. Men, pregnant women, and children stepping off the bus with only what they could carry. This father, who asked that we not show his face, traveled to Mexico from Brazil with his wife and 3 young kids before crossing the border. Would you have tried to do this when Donald Trump was president?
Definitely not. Definitely. We had the chance, the same violence that is going on today was there last year. We used to watch the news, and I definitely won't do this.
So did you come here because Joe Biden was elected president?
Basically. The main thing was the violence in my country. And the second thing, I think, was Joe Biden. It's like lighting up my hope. You know what I mean?
Director Diego Pina-Lopez has seen a steady uptick.
I think right now we're going to be dealing with fixing years of policies that really inhibited people's rights to claim asylum and find a safe place to go.
You've heard some call this a crisis right now. Is it a crisis?
The crisis really started when we stopped supporting these people. This is just really a consequence of those decisions.
Yeah, well, at least they had that last guy. I kept it running for that last guy because I was like the saving grace to that. But I don't know, maybe that interview Martha Raddatz had with that guy from Brazil who came because Biden was elected, whatever. Maybe, because he mentioned the violence that caused him to come early in the answer in a way like he had said it before. So maybe he said the violence first and she followed up about the Biden election. But that, at least in the clip you saw there, that's all like Martha Raddatz was like, was it because of Biden? Was it because of Biden? And there does seem to be a bias in the ABC report towards blaming the Biden administration. I don't know. I'd more agree with that last guy, Diego, that the crisis started when people started to treat people seeking asylum, people fleeing violence, or even fleeing poverty as if they aren't actually people. Anyway, I wanted to actually contrast what you just saw there from ABC, and when I show Martha Raddatz talking to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, in a little bit, I'm going to start with a clip where she shows another person who's actually being sent back saying they came because of Biden. So like ABC was really finding people to say they came because of Biden, which, believe it or not, is not what you're going to see from Steve Harrigan, one of the Fox News reporters. There are two Fox News reports. Steve Harrigan talking about the border, where he finds a guy from Honduras who started walking 7 months ago. And do the math, that's like before Biden was elected. So, and also fleeing violence. It might be a real asylum seeker. So kudos to Fox News for having that in their news summary. But then David Spunt does more, I think, of the Republican spin on the Biden's fault for the border crisis, which I'll talk about all of that with you a little more after we watch that Fox News Sunday news summary. Chris Wallace, Steve Harrigan, David Spunt together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The number of migrants caught trying to cross into this country from Mexico is on the rise and headed for a 20-year high. Members of the Biden administration have refused to call the situation on the border a crisis. But there's growing concern about the flood of unaccompanied minors into the U.S. and the conditions they face once they're here. And many Republicans say the Biden administration's decision to relax President Trump's policies is driving the surge. In a moment, we'll sit down with the man in charge of securing the border, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. But first, Fox team coverage. David Spunt reports from the White House. But we begin with Steve Harrigan in Mission, Texas, on the U.S. border with Mexico. Steve.
Chris, we've just been watching migrants cross over the border here into Mission, Texas. Small groups, 3, 5, and 10. We've seen buses go by as well to that processing center, some coming from as far away as Honduras. This family has been walking for 7 months. The husband, 25, carries his son, age 4, on his shoulders. The wife, 21, carries their one bag. The walk began 1,500 miles ago in Honduras. The motivation was life or death. A gang killed her brother, he says. It got very dangerous. They said they were going to kill us all, she says. The family is just one of many migrant families streaming north in small groups. Once across the Rio Grande onto U.S. territory, signs direct them to a processing center. The makeshift site offers some protection against the heat, the rain, and COVID. The family says they are going to Houston, confident that they will not be separated or deported. The family says they don't know if it will be easier, but they're going to try to find out. When you stand next to that family and look at them, especially the mother, you really see a deep sense of exhaustion. Chris?
Steve Harrigan reporting from the southern border. Steve, thank you for that. Now, let's turn to David Spunt at the White House with a view from Washington. David.
Hi, Chris. The administration's message to migrants: now is not the time to come to the southern border. Critics say that message needs to be more aggressive, and the president needs to visit personally now.
Thank you.
2 months into the job, the Biden White House is scrambling to manage a humanitarian dilemma.
We've got to deal with it and deal with it directly. The word is out in Central America. There's a new administration, and it's being tested.
The president and his administration prefer to call the surge a challenge, but Republicans insist it's much more.
This is a crisis. I don't care what the Secretary of Homeland Security wants to call it. It's a crisis.
Agents took into custody more than 19,000 family units last month, though officials are seeing a surge specifically in unaccompanied children. There are around 15,000 unaccompanied children in custody, and the numbers continue to rise. Nearly 9,500 unaccompanied children were detained at the border in February. That's nearly 3 times the amount from last February.
We can solve the immigration problem, but don't confuse a border crisis with an immigration problem.
The House passed 2 White House-approved immigration bills last Thursday. The fate of those bills unclear in an evenly divided Senate. Chris?
David, thank you. And joining us now, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas.
And I actually have 2 clips of Alejandro Mayorkas coming up, including one from Chris Wallace, although that's the second one. The first one is Martha Raddatz, the one I was telling you about, that starts off with one more person at the border saying that Biden brought them. But as I said before I showed the clip, I pretty much pre-criticized it, but you saw Steve Harrigan there saying that, or finding that guy from Brazil who actually left 7 months ago before Biden was even elected. Also for the Dash and Sandy fans out there, or can you hear Dash mewing in the background? Well, Sandy's lying down right there, and Dash walked by while... You got to be able to hear that now. Well, I actually recorded a bonus Dash and Sandy clip for you all while that last clip was playing, and you can even hear the clip playing in the background over here.
This family has been walking for 7 months. The husband, 25, carries his son, age 4, on his shoulders. The wife, 20.
So how much more live could it be? And Sandy's still lying down right there, like in that clip. But for the real Dash and Sandy or Dandy fans out there, this is the week that I will be playing the Dash Eats Sardine, Sandy Eats Bacon bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end of the program. So that'll be the final clip. But I also want to thank the people I saw who gave Super Chat contributions so far. I was looking at that while that last clip was playing. Here's... Oh, and thanks, Matthew, for that contribution, thanking me for my Friday live stream. I talked about Fox News bias versus MSNBC coverage of this Rand Paul versus Anthony Fauci fight about masks, where I found coverage at the same time from Fox News and MSNBC, and I thought the Fox News coverage was more biased. There's actually a link to that video, the Friday live stream, down in the video description if you're interested in watching it. It's about 25 minutes long. It was kind of like one of my old Fox News bias videos. And then I also saw that last Super Chat contribution was from, is that Jesus or Jesus? I don't want to figure out how to, I don't know how to pronounce that, but it looks like Jesus or Jesus, asking about that book behind me here, the Fight of the Century. Which is a book about the ACLU. I talked about being an ACLU activist, volunteer. You know, all opinions I express here are my own. I very rarely get to speak on behalf of the ACLU. That clip I showed from June 2014 was one of those occasions, but right now I'm just giving my own opinions. And Fight of the Century talks about several recent several important ACLU cases over the years, and how the ACLU has been an important proponent of civil rights and civil liberties. So that's the... and some people think that this is like a made-up Zoom background or whatever, but no, see? Michael Chabon and Elliot Waldman, or I don't know if this is the... See? So... thank you, Jesus or Jesus, and sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. And now I want to get to, it's not the longest news summary. Meet the Press, Chuck Todd doesn't necessarily have the longest best package this week, but I think it actually is the best, the most, to coin a phrase, fair and balanced coverage of the border situation, other than the whole corporate bias here towards, once the people show up at the border, that's the crisis. I mean, they do talk a little bit about Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras and what's going on there as a source of the problem. But anyway, I'll show the Meet the Press clip and talk with you a little more about that after we watch together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. It's fair to call the deteriorating situation at the U.S.-Mexican border a crisis, even if the Biden administration refuses to use that word. But it's more than that. It's a political crisis for the new president with no easy way out. Republicans are quick to blame Mr. Biden for the growing number of migrants crossing the southern border, saying it's his rhetoric and policy shifts that caused this surge in migrants. The new Democratic administration says it was left with a dismantled and unworkable immigration system by former President Trump. Look, conservatives want nothing less than a big wall and some stricter enforcement of the border. Progressives want nothing less than humane treatment for migrants fleeing violence, wherever it is, and a path to citizenship for those that are already here. So far, Americans largely approve of Mr. Biden's young presidency, and he wants to focus on vaccinations, COVID relief, infrastructure, voting rights, racial inequalities, and renewing America's image at home and abroad. But he can't control the news cycle. Just last week, an intelligence report reminded us of the threat from domestic terror groups that Mr. Biden must confront, particularly after January 6th. Events and politics have a way of applying their own pressure points, and right now, that pressure is pointed directly at our southern border. It's a growing humanitarian crisis, though it's not a new one.
Why did you cross?
In the Rio Grande Valley alone, Customs and Border Protection is detaining more than 500 unaccompanied children a day, with the facility at more than 5 times its capacity.
How much of an increase have you noticed in the last couple of weeks?
It's quite significant.
More than 5,000 children under 18 are in Border Patrol custody. More than 500 held for over 10 days, far longer than the 72-hour legal limit. Nearly 10,000 more are in HHS care. Surges of unaccompanied minors have been cyclical, occurring under Presidents Obama, Trump, and now Biden.
It just seems like we just went through this not too long ago, and here we go again.
But the administration says the U.S. is on pace to encounter more migrants on the southwest border than it has in the last 20 years. And is trying new, more aggressive messaging.
Now is not the time to come to the border.
Frankly, the message isn't don't come now, it's don't come in this way, ever.
I can say quite clearly, don't come.
That's after mixed messages on whether the president's approach may be motivating more migrants to come.
The idea that a more humane policy would be in place may have driven people to make that decision.
Republicans are seizing on what was Donald Trump's signature campaign issue.
They've caused a crisis.
This is a crisis that is man-made by one man, Joe Biden.
It's more than just a crisis.
If that's not a crisis, it'll do to one gets here.
The Biden administration is pushing back.
You said crisis on the border. Was that a
challenges on the border?
A crisis is when a nation is willing to rip a 9-year-old child out of the hands of his or her parent and separate that family.
Though President Biden ended the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy for asylum seekers, he has kept in place Title 42, a pandemic-era rule which allows the administration to expel migrants without due process for public health reasons. Of the more than 650,000 migrants encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border over the last year, fewer than 1% have been able to seek protection, according to the LA Times. Now, as Biden works to restore faith that government is competent,
there's nothing, not a single thing we cannot do if we do it together.
He has asked Mexican President López Obrador to do more to solve the problem. On Friday, Mexico announced a crackdown on its border with Guatemala after the United States announced it will share 2.5 million vaccine doses with Mexico.
This action will allow our neighbors to meet a critical vaccination need in their countries.
And joining me now is the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. Mr. Secretary, welcome to Meet the Press.
You see, the Homeland Security Secretary was on 4 of the 5 shows, not quite the full Ginsburg, like Monica Lewinsky's attorney, Daniel Ginsburg, back in the day, who did all 5 shows and created the phrase full Ginsburg, but he did 4 of the 5, and I have 2 big clips of him coming up. But I want to finish the news summaries. I pretty much pre-criticized that. Well, I actually praised it mostly. It did still have that focus on the crisis. I don't think they really talked that much about Central America, which comes up in the much shorter news summary from Dana Bash, starting out CNN State of the Union, where possibly we're at a tipping point, and she's talking, that's the State of the Union this week, talking about the Biden administration reaching its 100 million vaccine dose in the first 100 days goal after like the 58th day, although you remember weeks ago I was talking about how that was much too small a goal and wouldn't get us anywhere near the number of vaccinations we needed in time. So, and they're up to like 3 million vaccinations a day, not 1 million vaccinations a day. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is at a tipping point. The Biden administration is now more than 2 months into office, and this week achieved their goal of putting 100 million vaccines in arms, far ahead of schedule in just 58 days. But as there are cautious signs that COVID-19 pandemic is improving, the new administration is now facing 2 other challenges: rising domestic extremism, on display this week after the shootings in Atlanta, and a surge of migrants at the border. There are now more than 5,000 unaccompanied children in U.S. Customs and Border Protection custody, and that's nearly twice the number of children in Border Patrol custody at the peak of the 2019 border crisis during the Trump administration. That's according to a former Border Patrol official. Now, more than 600 children have been in custody for more than 10 days. That's far longer than the 72 hours or 3 days allowed by law. While the administration is not calling the situation a crisis, a former senior government official who worked for Republican and Democratic administrations on border issues tells me that this is a, quote, 5-alarm emergency. The influx of young migrants is due in part to worsening conditions in Central America and a change in policy by the Biden administration to accept children who had previously been turned away. On Friday, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas led a bipartisan Senate delegation to El Paso, Texas, and one Democratic senator said he fought back tears during the visit. And now, just back from that trip to the border, joining me now is Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Thank you.
And as I said, I will have a couple clips from Secretary Mayorkas coming up. But I have one final news summary. CNN State of the Union, which is actually mostly about COVID-19. You heard a little bit about the vaccination there, and you'll hear Margaret, Brennan, and then Mark Strassman from Atlanta talking mostly about how people are lifting restrictions too quickly. You'll see a report from Miami where there's like spring break mania that may cause another outbreak. Last week I was talking about how last Monday, I got my first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. See, I even have my I got the shot sticker here, and I think you can even, can you see there's some bruising. Can you see yeah, you can definitely see this bruise here where I got my vaccination. So I am putting my shoulder where my mouth is, and I'm getting the Pfizer vaccine because even though It's a new vaccine. It's been tested for many months on many thousands of people for most likely side effects, and the real effects of getting COVID-19 are, there's, up to 5% of people end up hospitalized, 1, 2, 3% of people die, although it depends on your age and your comorbidities. But if you do the cost-benefit analysis, the vaccine is better than COVID, and the vaccine is very effective, at least against wild COVID, as Anthony Fauci called it in the video that Matthew was talking about I made on Friday in his Senate testimony, where he was talking back and forth with Rand Paul about whether you have to wear a mask after you get vaccinated or after you've been infected by COVID. But anyway, that's a long enough introduction for CBS News. I've often said is the COVID broadcasting system, by the attention they've given to the COVID outbreak all the way back before anyone else thought it was even a story. And that continues. Oh, and Mark Strassman, of course, being in Atlanta for who knows why for so long, also reports on the killing spree of the spas in and around Atlanta that killed several Asian women and a couple other people, and some people think was anti-Asian hate violence, and there's the whole guy having a bad day according to the police. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more possibly after we watch that final news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. It is the second official day of spring, a season that brings with it the complications of warmer weather. This year, it's spring break and a spring surge in unaccompanied children at the southern border as they seek a better life in the U.S. We've got a lot to get to today, and we begin with senior national correspondent Mark Strassman.
Despite a curfew and the pandemic, Miami Beach jammed with spring breakers last night until police fired pepper balls to break up the party.
We've got too many people coming, and we have COVID at the same time.
Irresponsibility unmasked. To health officials, this is the other March Madness.
You could hardly see the sand because all the umbrellas on the beach.
And reverse COVID progress. Over the last 2 months, new cases and daily deaths both have plummeted. But
you are seeing increases in number of cases per day.
The so-called UK variant blamed for up to 30% of new infections. Viral spread. The TSA reports 8 straight days of more than 1 million people flying. Relaxed COVID restrictions and resentful attitudes, like this mask burning in Arizona.
We are the people, and we're done putting a muzzle on our face.
In the vaccine rollout, more than 43 million Americans have been fully vaccinated, over half of them aged 65 and over. But there's no vaccine for COVID-era racism. 3 spas here in Atlanta became homicide scenes. 8 murder victims, 6 of them Asian women. The confessed killer could face Georgia's new hate crime law. And the murders spotlighted the increasing risk to Asian Americans. You bum, this 75-year-old woman yelled in Chinese. In San Francisco, she beat her attacker bloody with a stick.
It's painful and infuriating at the same time. The hell is wrong with us?
During the pandemic, thousands of Asian Americans have been assaulted physically and verbally.
They've been attacked, blamed, scapegoated, and harassed. We cannot be complicit.
It's a COVID contradiction. Vaccines have made millions of us feel more protected, but many Asian Americans feel more vulnerable than ever.
That's Mark Strassman in Atlanta, and we want to go now to the West Coast and the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti.
I don't have any Mayor Eric Garcetti clips. I saw Chair's Bed asked about FEMA being sent to the border, and I believe that was even mentioned in one of the previous news summaries, so thank you for that super chat contribution and question, Chair's Bed. And I want to get, I think I pretty much talked about that clip before I showed it, and I want to get to the 2 Alejandro Mayorkas clips. I want to compare ABC and Fox News. The ABC one is longer, Like I said, ABC did this whole in-depth look at the border that I thought was skewed towards the Republican and also Customs and Border Protection agent perspective. And I showed you a large part of that. And Alejandro Mayorkas watched the whole thing, including the guy from Brazil who said he came because of Biden. And then you'll see this clip at the end of that news summary, someone else who I cut off the part, I think, where they said they're sending her and her 10-year-old son back. She didn't get in, but she came because of Biden. And then that's the introduction to Martha Raddatz talking about some of the problems with the Biden administration immigration policy over in this clip.
Celia and her 10-year-old son now headed back to Guatemala after being sent back to Mexico. The reason she risked everything?
Él prometió que sí pasaba así con menores.
Biden promised that we can cross with minors.
She said she heard that because of President Biden, she would be welcome. And joining me now is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I want to start right there. We heard the sheriff say it, the governor say it, and the migrants I spoke to say it. They are coming across because they believe they will be welcomed under the Biden administration. You said yourself 3 weeks ago, we're not saying don't come, we're saying don't come now. President Biden had a stronger message later, but the messages are mixed at best, Mr. Secretary.
Martha, good morning. The message is quite clear. Do not come. The border is closed. The border is secure. We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults under the CDC's authority, under Title 42 of the United States Code, because we are in the midst of a pandemic, and that is a public health imperative. We are encouraging children not to come. Now is not the time to come. Do not come. The journey is dangerous. We are building safe, orderly, and humane ways to address the needs of vulnerable children. Do not come.
I know you're trying to get that message out now, but your team was also briefed by career professionals at DHS during the transition about the possibility of this crisis. You yourself say we are on pace to have one of the largest migrant surges in 20 years. Why were you not prepared for this?
Martha, let me be clear. We have seen large numbers of migration in the past. We know how to address it. We have a plan. We are executing on our plan, and we will succeed. This is what we do. But one thing is also clear, that it takes time. And why does it take time now? Why is it especially challenging and difficult now? Because the entire system under United States law that has been in place throughout administrations of both parties was dismantled in its entirety by the Trump administration. So we are rebuilding the system as we address the needs of vulnerable children who arrive at our borders. And that is what it is
Mr. Secretary,
all about. It is about vulnerable
coming
children.
in. It's exactly about vulnerable children. You have approximately 5,200 children currently being held in adult border facilities, well over the 2019 peak during the Trump administration. They're only supposed to stay there for 72 hours, but they've been there for more than 10 days, 650 kids, and it's getting worse. Let me read you a tweet from Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, who was with you on a trip down here. He said, just left the border processing facility, hundreds of kids packed into big open rooms. In a corner, I fought back tears as a 13-year-old girl sobbed uncontrollably, explaining through a translator how terrified she was, having been separated from her grandmother and without her parents. Murphy said these are facilities you wouldn't want to put your child in for more than 10 minutes. I know you say you have a plan now, but again, how did this happen? You knew there was a pandemic before. HHS had failed to do this before as well under Obama, under President Trump. So how do you speed this up, and how did this happen?
Martha, it takes time. We all know what happened to that 13-year-old girl in the prior administration. She was turned away and turned into the desert of Mexico or sent back to the very country from which she fled by reason of fear of persecution. We are addressing the needs of that child now. When I say it takes time, I mean it, because we're dealing with a dismantled system. And we did not have the ordinary, safe, and just transition from one administration to another. And so we are executing on our plans. We have dispatched FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, to assist HHS in building additional capacity to address the needs of children and to move those children through to their sponsors in the United States to shelter them in the way that they deserve and that their needs require. That is what we are doing. When people speak of, well, you knew of this, plans aren't made at 20,000 feet. Plans are contracts, personnel, policies, training, procedures, all of the elements of operations that were entirely dismantled, and taking care of a workforce that was not vaccinated and not protected from the COVID-19 pandemic.
I want to stop you.
So I think other than one little glitch there where Alejandro Mayorkas said children's by mistake, I think, but he did a pretty good job defending himself from being ill-prepared for a foreseeable humanitarian crisis at the border, given that the Biden administration, to some extent, as you saw, was unprepared for a foreseeable humanitarian crisis at the border. Though it's more complicated than that, and a lot of it has to do with bad Trump policies, and that's the next clip I want to show you from Fox News Sunday, where Alejandro Mayorkas basically defends Biden's policies versus Chris Wallace trying to argue that Trump's policies, the Remain in Mexico thing you saw in the news summaries, that was really inhumane, that people lived in these camps and were subject to, well, I think you'll hear Alejandro Mayorkas and then Tammy Duckworth both defend the change from Trump to Biden in immigration policies, but starting with Alejandro Mayorkas talking to Chris Wallace over in this clip.
I want to start with something that White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said this week. Take a look, sir.
We are taking steps to ensure that when kids come to the border, we look and see if they have a phone number in their pocket so we can call the family member and get them to those family members as quickly as possible.
I understand compassion for these children, but why is it the responsibility of the U.S. to resettle minors coming across the border illegally?
Chris, that is the law under the United States. We have an asylum program that recognizes young children, young vulnerable children's right to claim asylum, to claim fear from persecution by reason of their membership in a particular group. That is what the law provides, and we administer and enforce those laws.
You and the administration talk about being humane, but let's go back to what the Trump policy was, which in the case of non-Mexican minors was not, as has been suggested, simply to turn these kids around and push them back into the desert. In fact, we would coordinate with other countries. We would charter planes. We would send them back by airplane to resettle with their families. Why is it more humane to take these kids, to put them in Border Patrol facilities that were not meant for children, oftentimes for many more days than the legal limit?
Chris, that is not what the prior administration did. You'll forgive me. The prior administration did expel children, did fly children to countries from which they were fleeing. Countries that did not have the capacity to administer asylum claims, countries that suffer tremendous violence, poverty, corruption, and other infirmities. So to suggest that the prior administration handled the needs of children in a humane way is just false.
Well, you seem to have agreed with me, sir, that they would put them on planes. They wouldn't just send them back over the desert. They'd put them on a plane and fly them back to Guatemala or El Salvador. Are you suggesting that every minor, the thousands and thousands of minors coming across this country, has a legitimate asylum claim, and that a lot of them aren't just coming across the border because they want to have a better life here, which is understandable, but isn't necessarily our responsibility?
Chris, we administer our laws, and let me say a few things, if I may. Number one, the prior administration dismantled the orderly and safe way that these children could make their claims. It tore down the Central American Minors Program that allowed these children to make their claims under United States law without having to take the perilous journey. We are rebuilding that process. We are encouraging families not to send their children along the dangerous journey because so many do not make it safely. We are encouraging them not to do so. Yet, if they arrive at the border, we have a responsibility to allow them to make their claims under United States law and to address, these are vulnerable children, to address their needs, and we can do so in a safe and orderly manner. It takes time because the entire system was dismantled. We are working on it, and we will succeed because that is what we do.
And like I said, I think Alejandro Mayorkas did a pretty good job of explaining why Biden's immigration policies were a better, more humane alternative to what Trump was doing, even though the transition is somewhat painful at the border at the moment. And here's Tammy Duckworth making a similar argument over on CBS News's Face the Nation, responding to Margaret Brennan bringing up, like I said, near the beginning of the video, how Obama was the deporter-in-chief, which is why I showed that clip of me fighting Obama's immigration policies back in 2014. And I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch that final immigration clip together over here.
On immigration, I want to ask you, President Obama, as you recall, was heavily criticized. He was even called the deporter-in-chief. President Biden now is coming under heavy criticism for this crisis at the U.S. border. From where you sit, does the administration need to send a stronger message to discourage migrants from making the trek to the U.S.?
Well, let's make it clear. We have a situation at the border, and that is as a result of 4 years of failed policies, inhumane policies, and a systematic dismantling of the asylum system by Donald Trump. We all saw what Donald Trump can do in terms of damages in a single day on January 6th. And he's had 4 years to basically undermine our nation's immigration system.
But they're coming now.
Right, but you know what? It's as a result of him dismantling the asylum system and the pathways for seeking asylum that used to exist. I know that President Biden is going to be committed to repairing that system that Donald Trump broke in order to make it not only more work better, but also to make it humane so that these kids and other migrants can actually apply for asylum in their home countries without coming here. You know, Donald Trump stopped aid to the Northern Triangle countries. He did everything he could to dismantle the system, which led to the crisis we're in now.
And the aid to the Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, that I've been trying to stress is one of the most important points. It's not a crisis at the border, it's a crisis in the Golden Triangle. That's why there are people, after 7 months of walking, showing up at the border. I mean, come on, how bad must things be? And anyway, I want to finish up the show quickly with the last two clips, and then that bonus Dash and Sandy Dandy clip where Dash eats the sardine and Sandy eats the bacon. I promised you a voting rights filibuster clip from Senator Raphael Warnock, the new senator from Georgia, talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
That's the reason why we have to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act.
Let me ask you specifically on that. Look, H.R. 1, and then there's the version you just said. That's a very big, comprehensive bill that frankly has a lot of... There's folks that argue even on the left side of the aisle that it maybe needs some changes. The voting rights, the updating of the Voting Rights Act, That has been something that has been fairly easy to get done in a bipartisan way in the past. Should that be the focus first?
Well, I like the fact that you point out that voting rights traditionally has been bipartisan. The last time we reauthorized the 1965 Voting Rights Act, George W. Bush was president, and it passed the United States Senate 98-0. I think the onus is on my colleagues to explain why they're not supporting voting rights. Voting rights is not just one issue alongside other issues. It is fundamental. It is foundational. It is who we say we are as an American people. It's the covenant we have with one another, one person, one vote. And so we've got to do everything we can to pass voting rights.
Is that, I understand that. What does that mean with the filibuster? You have said you'd like to see a carve out. Have you had a conversation with Senators Manchin or Sinema about the idea of a democracy carve out?
Oh, I'm talking to my colleagues all the time. I've been in the United States Senate a few short weeks. But Chuck, I have to tell you, I know that folks are focused on the filibuster, but this language about the filibuster is language much too puny as an appropriate frame to talk about something as vital and as precious as voting rights. We have to pass voting rights no matter what, and it's a contradiction to insist on minority rights in the Senate while refusing to stand up for minority rights in the society. As someone who served as the pastor of Congressman John Lewis, who literally laid his life on the line crossing a bridge in order to secure that right for us, I'm going to do everything in my power to convince my colleagues to support voting rights. It's the only reason why any one of us is in the Senate in the first place. Somebody voted for us. And right now, in real time, we've got 250 voter suppression bills all across our country. We cannot allow this to happen. We have to secure our democracy.
I want to ask you about the controversy regarding some comment.
Yeah, so there you see the Raphael Warnock clip I promised. I've been covering voting rights. Last week was Biden's last win because of the filibuster. The Voting Rights Act, the H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, may or may not pass, even though, as Raphael Warnock pointed out, back during the George W. Bush administration, it got 98 votes in the Senate. I just wanted to play that clip, and I may be doing a video on filibuster reform coming up in the next few weeks. And then the final topic I promised I would cover is this last clip of the governor of Arkansas. You think Trump is gone and the whole Republican rule is gone, but they still live on in Supreme Court appointments. And during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings, there was a lot of talk that she might be the fifth vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. And if the governor of Arkansas has his way, that's what's going to happen, because that's why he signed a bill recently, as Dana Bash got him to admit, or I guess it's not a big secret, on CNN State of the Union. Final news clip tonight over here.
Americans with their rallying around Asian Americans this last weekend.
Earlier this month, you signed a near total abortion ban into law in your state. Under the law, abortions are only permitted when necessary to save the life of a mother. There are no exceptions in cases of rape or incest. And even when you signed it, you said you had reservations about the law, saying that it violates Supreme Court precedent. So to be clear, did you sign this bill because you hope that it'll be a vehicle for the Supreme Court to look at overturning Roe v. Wade?
Yes, that was the whole design of the law. It is not constitutional under Supreme Court cases right now. And I did prefer a rape and incest exception. I didn't get a vote on that. And so I signed it because it is a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. That was the intent of it. I think there's a very narrow chance that the Supreme Court will accept that case, but we'll see. And again, I would prefer, it's been my historic position that the three exceptions would be rape, incest, and the life of the mother. But this is a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade, and that's the intent of the legislation.
Governor Asa Hutchinson, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for admitting that you signed an unconstitutional bill that was even more extreme than your own anti-choice, anti-reproductive justice views, where didn't even have an exception for rape and incest that you believe in. But at least it might get us a good spot on the Supreme Court if it was packed well enough by the 3 appointments by Donald Trump and the Federalist Society. But that's a topic for another day, and that is the final topic, the final news clip. But without further ado, I promised last week I showed a teaser of the Dash eats sardine, Sandy eats bacon, Dash and Sandy dandy clip that people have been asking for so long. I made it available to Patreon patrons a week early. If you want to become a Patreon patron, there's a link down in the video description for that. There's a link for direct PayPal donations. I appreciate all those super chat contributions along the way. I got another one from Sinful Solutions after the other ones I already acknowledged, so thanks for that. And I even appreciate just the thumbs up, subscribing to my channel, supportive comments, say you like what I'm doing. And Dash and Sandy, I think both liked what I was doing last week when I made this bonus Dash and Sandy dandy sardine bacon clip. I guess I said without further ado, and then there was further ado. But now, without further ado, here's the clip. Sandy, come here, Sandy. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, he likes it.
Oh.
Sandy.
No, leave it on the... She afraid to eat it because of Dash?
I feel like she's not feeling so bold today. Look at the nice crispy bacon.
So that's the Dash and Sandy dandy. Dash eats sardine, Sandy eats bacon. I saw Lulu Girl asking, Dash did eat most of that sardine, not the whole thing. Some of it did get thrown away. That was my daughter holding the plate. You hear her at the beginning saying LiberalViewer Presents, back when, I think that LiberalViewer Presents was when she was like 8 years old. Now she's an adult and can consent to being in the video. So anyway, that's the show. I'm kind of over time, so I will, unless there's some reason for me to make some video this week of some kind, I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday at least through the end of this school semester. Apparently at least through May I'll be doing these Sunday live clip roundups. I appreciate all of you who join me live, my recorded show viewers, and I guess until next week I will be seeing all of you around the internet.